Welcome to Office 2010 video number 41. Hey, we're going to start talking about Access, the database program that Microsoft makes. Now, before we get started, we got to download some stuff. And as always, we have our jump drive in, and we have gone to our class notes. And now we're going to save files to Access folder. We created that in our first chapter way back when. Video number 1. All right, we're going to download. There's 2 handouts, which are pretty important, and 2 start files. The finished files and the videos aren't posted yet because I'm shooting them right now. So I'm going to download these, each one at a time. Navigate, Lexar, Highline, whatever quarter you're in, Business 216, Class Notes, Access, and then click Save. Close. I'm going to download this other one. Click Save. Never click Open. We talked about that many times. I'm going to click this. Notice once we've already saved to location, boom, there it is. I'm going to keep the name each time. Click Save. And finally, we're going to click on Data for Wooden Crafts. Save. Click Save. All right, now we want to just talk about what a database is. And even before we do that, we're going to open up one of our Excel files we were looking at earlier in the class and notice some things about data and how to store it. Now we're going to go open a couple different files. I'm going to go down to my jump drive, and I'm going to start with Excel. And I'm going to go to our excelisfun 2010 is fun start videos. This is the video we use throughout all the Excel videos. I'm going to open that. And then I'm going to immediately go back and now down to our Access, and I'm going to open up Product Supplier Database. So an example we're going to look at. This video is just an introduction to what a database is and how it's set up. And I also want to open up Database and Access Introduction Notes. Now let's go over to our Excel file. Here's all of our worksheets. We just got done the last few weeks looking through learning about Excel. I'm going to go to the sheet called Data Analysis. And boom, lo and behold, what is this right here? This is some raw data. And we talked about this in Excel because in Excel, when we wanted to do filtering or sorting or pivot tables, you had to have field names at the top in the first row. Each field name is the name of the data that goes in this column. Customers go here. Cost of goods sold goes here. Date goes here. Field names in the first row. Each row was called a record. Now, the exact same thing is going to be true over in Access. We will have field names, and our raw data will be stored in as small pieces as possible in individual cells. Not exactly the same as Excel, but it will look the same. Records here. One of the main differences, though, is that we will always have a first column like Insert. And we will have something called a primary key or unique identifier. I'm going to call it over here invoice number. Right, so we know from business that an invoice number, you never have duplicate invoice numbers. So if we start at 1,000, and the next one is 1,001. So for invoices in business, you can never have a duplicate. And that is incredibly important when we get over to Access and start creating our data sets with field names and records and rows, just like we did in Excel, except for have this new thing called a primary key. Now I've typed 1,000, 1,001. I'm going to double click and send this down. By highlighting 2 numbers, I established the pattern add 1. So of course it went all the way down. And lo and behold, now we're getting closer to what a database is. It's going to store raw data just like we saw in Excel, except for it will have a unique identifier. Or what's called, this whole field is going to be called a primary key. And guess what? No duplicates means we are never going to have redundant records. We have exactly one record for invoice 102 and never any more. The unique identifier or primary key is so we never have duplicates. Now, over here in Excel, we did filter, things like that, and pivot table. And what we did was we took the raw data and created useful information from it. So a simple thing we did was add all of John's sales. What we did when we added all John's sales is we got some good information, right? His total sales. Then we could see, did he meet a quota or not? In that circumstance, we created information from raw data, and that information was used to make a decision. For example, we could say, did John get his bonus, or did he meet the sales quota? This idea that we learned in Excel, field names, records and rows, raw data, create information from raw data, is exactly what databasing is all about. Let's go over and look at our access. I'm going to click on this access file here. I'm going to click Enable Content. Now, just a moment ago, we saw over in Excel we had field names and records. Well, here we have what are called tables. Tables will be the heart of any database. And then we're going to have things called queries, forms, and reports. Now, in this class, these are the only 4 objects in Access that we'll get to talk about. But let's look first at a table, and then we'll take a tour of what Access is and what all these other objects are. But one thing I want to do right off the bat is this is the navigation pane, and I like to set it up with all the tables together, all the queries, all the forms, all the reports. By the way, I'll give you one guess. What do you think a query is? Let's just remind ourselves, what do we do in Excel? We turned on the filter, right? Data, filter, and then we said something like, oh yeah, give me all of Chin's sales. Guess what? In Excel, when we say, hey, give me all of Chin's sales, you're asking a question of the raw data. And as soon as you click OK in Excel on the filter, the answer, this little subset is really what we're going to be doing over in Access when we call it a query. But what do? We said, hey, show me all of Chin. So we were asking a question of the raw data, because the raw data by itself is usually not very useful. But now we can look through Chin's records and then do whatever analyze we're doing. So I'll give you one guess. What do you think a query is? It's exactly like what we just did. We give it some criteria, a query, right? And it goes to the table and then extracts the data and gives it to us. All right. But anyway, so with these objects, let's just open a table. I'm going to double click any object here. And there's a table. Well, you got to be kidding me. Look, it looks just like Excel, but it's not. Here is the unique identifier. We'll always have one column that will have some unique identifier that allows no duplicates. But then look at this. We can even double click like we can over in Excel and size the columns. Product name, there's the product name. Field name, right? Range, these are boomerangs, so this is the range out. Here's the supplier ID. This is the ID for the company we bought them for. Units, cost, price. These are all field names. Each one of these are records. Table is the heart of any database. Without the table, we're going to have none of this other stuff. Just like over in Excel, we're not doing pivot tables or filtering unless we have the raw data. All right. Now, before we switch over to Access completely, just one other note. Well, why in the world, if we can do data analysis over in Excel, would we ever want to do it in Access? Well, Excel is not really built to be the best type of database. Now, with that said, the fact is the way that people use Excel in the working world, people do store raw data. We saw the table feature over here on this sheet. Table feature over here. We saw we have these dynamic ranges. That was the programmers at Excel, at Microsoft, trying to make Excel more like a database. I'm going back to this Analyze sheet. All right, so why in the world, if we could do this over here, would we ever want to actually store all raw data and do queries and data analysis in Access? Because Excel is really not a real database. It can only hold 1 million rows. Now, that doesn't seem, that seems like a lot of data. But in real databases, you can have a lot more than that. Also, making sure that the right kind of data gets into your table. It's called data validation and field properties. That's sometimes easier to do, or it's easier to do over in Access. Although it can be done in Excel, it's just much harder. And there's something called a relational database, which means you have one table related to another. And although that's possible in Excel, it's just a lot harder. So if you're really going to store raw data, even if you start out in Excel, you eventually want to end up over in a real database, whether Access or some custom-made database like SAP or something like that. And so if you really are going to store raw data and create information from it, you do want to do it over in Access. Now, why in the world is Excel used so often? Well, it is the default program on the planet Earth. Basically everyone knows a little bit about Excel. Not everyone knows something about Access. One other note, if you're doing analysis on the fly, which means you're changing the filter a lot, and this is easier to do a query in Excel than it is to create one over in Access. So a lot of times, even if people store all the raw data in Access, or a real database like a SAP or some other custom-made database for a business, even if they store all their data there, people often dump their data in Excel and then in essence do their data analysis on the fly, playing around, changing this and that. All right, so Excel is good for that. Excel is good when people don't know how to use a database. But ultimately, if you're going to store your raw data, you should do it in Access or some other database. Now I'm going to close this Excel file. I'm not going to save it. All right, now this video is just a tour through what we can, what Access is, and what it does. Before we look here, I want to go back over to the sheet right here. This sheet is pretty good. It's our introduction handout, and it just says, when we talked about this in Excel, keep your raw data in the smallest pieces with field names. For example, this is a complete address. You would never keep it in one cell or over in Access in, here's what looks like a cell. You never put the whole address, city, and zip there. All right? Smallest, break your raw data into small pieces, store it in fields, and then you're able to do data analysis. This picture right here just reminds us these are field names, which we learned over in Excel. Records are in rows. And this is going to be one of the real important differences. We're always going to have a primary key or unique identifier. All right, I'll let you look through this handout. It kind of summarizes what each one of the objects does. And then at the end, it says what are some of the differences between Access and the other programs like Word and Excel. I'm going to close this. Now, we want to take a tour. I'm going to close this. Now, it's asking me to save. The reason it's asking me to save is not because I entered any raw data, but I actually changed the column width, which is considered a structural change. I'm going to say yes. All right, now, 1, 2, 3, 4. Tables. Without a table, you cannot create a query. So for example, here's the supplier table. If I don't have a supplier table, I can't build a query to ask a question of it. So that's why tables are called the heart of any database. So I'm going to close this. An example of a query. Here's a query. This query, I named it properly, just like we've been learning in this class. I always name things smartly. By the way, in Chapter 2 in the textbook, when you do the homework and they tell you to name the queries, query 1, query 2, query 3, don't do that. Give it a smart name like inventory value or average price or something like that. So this query, I'm going to open it. It looks just like a table. But behind the scenes, we'll see how to do this later. We actually created the question which says, hey, please show me just the products for supplier GB43 and TP01. So that's an example of the answer from creating a query. Forms, all they are, they're the easiest thing to understand of all. When I open this up, all it is this is the place where we can enter raw data. And what's the name of this form? It's product. So anytime I enter a record here, you can see down here, here's a navigation area. Anytime I add a new record by clicking that button right there, which we'll do in a moment. Anytime you add a new record, it just throws it right into the products table. So a form is a user interface. You know, big databases have millions of records. Or even if you guys think here at Highline Community College, right? The database has all of your names, all of the instructors' names, all the classes, all the administrators, all sorts of things, right? So the tables are huge. You wouldn't want to go and open up this huge table. No, you use a user interface like this. So here at Highline, you go over to registration and you give them your student ID. Oh, the student ID, that's the unique identifier. And why would they have a student ID for unique identifier? Because you don't want to mix your grades up with someone else. So unique identifier, student ID, your record, there's only one of them. But so when you go over to registration, they just type in the ID or Ctrl F to find you. And this form is looking into the table. Then they could change any data. And as soon as you change the data, it goes into the table. So forms are just user interfaces. Reports. Almost always you have a lot of queries. You're asking a lot of questions, doing data analysis and calculations, just like over in Excel with queries, like inventory value. This one was a data analysis. We asked the question, give me these two suppliers. This one was just doing a calculation. If I open it up, it's just calculating our inventory value. You'd never type in inventory value, or almost never. Because over in the products table, we have how many units. In fact, let's open this. Over here, we have how many units we have on hand and our cost. We can calculate the inventory value based on this data. We would never have an extra field where we type it in. That would take too much time, and it would be redundant because we already have the information here. This is the same as when we were over in Excel. You know, we had a cell with units and costs, and then we'd multiply them. Well, this query, remember, all of our data analysis and calculations will be done in queries. This is just multiplying those two fields over in the product table. But here are our queries. A report is just a fancy, we'll take these queries and make a nice looking report of them. I'm going to close both of these queries. Finally, report. This report is just looking at the supplier table. So, or no, it's not. It's actually looking at just one supplier. So this is based, this is the reorder phone list. Ooh, look at that. That's probably not named properly. Wow, we'll have to fix that. So a report, and let's close this. And let's go look at this query. I'm going to double click and open it up. And that's not it either. Reorder phone list. There it is. So the reorder phone list. This is the query that says which items, it probably said units less than 10. It gave us this answer. And then we made a fancy report out of it. Wow. So when I double click and open this, wow, we're going to have to fix that. That shouldn't say supplier. That shouldn't either there. It should say reorder phone list. Nothing like making errors to learn, though. Now, so we saw the 4 objects just to kind of tour. One other thing, in the textbook, they're going to do for the navigation pane, they're going to go tables as the view, tables and related views. I pretty much don't like this. It shows the supplier table and then all the objects made from that. One confusing, well, anyway, so we're not going to show it like that. We're going to group the objects together. And that is a simple changing the view. I'm going to say object type, just right there, and then all access objects. And just like that, you can see all the objects grouped together. Now, all these objects, normally, here's a supplier table and here's a products table. Those would be like sheets in Excel in one workbook. Or many people keep products like this and supplier in different workbooks. So over in Excel, we would have maybe multiple files. In addition, reports or even queries. Maybe reports are in Word or Project or something like that. So outside of Access, we might have many files that make up all of the data, queries, and reports for a business. But in Access, all of these objects are stored together, and together are considered the database. Now, what we want to do now is I want to show you just a few things like find, changing data, and things like that. So we're going to open up the products table. Right? And see down at the bottom here, you can see this is the navigation. It says 1 of 8. Now I'm going to close this, come over to the products table, and you can see there's 8. We have 8 items. I'm going to close this. Now I'm going to go over to the form, and I'm going to open up products. Let's just say we have a new product. I'm going to come down here and click the new blank record. Product ID is 10009. Tab, the product name is Quad Long Distance. The range is 35 meters. The supplier ID, wow, look at that. There's a drop down. And guess what? We'll see how to do this. We actually briefly saw this over in Excel too, but this is actually looking to the supplier table. The only things that are allowed in this field right here are the suppliers that we get. If we get a new supplier, we actually have to add them to the supplier table first before doing this here. This is from Gel Boomerangs. We're going to buy 10. The cost is 16. Ooh, notice how I just typed 16 in tab, and it's automatically formatted. And the price is going to be 34 bucks. Now, I want you to Now, before we enter this record and then go look from the form, looking at the table and make sure the record got added there, I want to talk about two things, undo and save. Now, undo, if you're in the middle of entering a record, when you use the undo button up here or Ctrl Z, it'll work on this record, but it won't go to prior records. So if you're entering lots of records, and you want to go back, undo, and go back to a couple of records, you just can't do it. Undo when you're entering raw data only works on the current record. Okay, that's point number 1 about undo. Point number 2 about undo, when we actually, in our next video, learn how to create tables and queries from scratch, then undo works a lot. When you're actually creating the object, undo works. But when you're entering raw data, forget it. Undo only works on this record. Now, point number 2, I want to talk about that. Well, undo that's much different than programs like Word and Excel. Undo always works, right? But there's a difference. In Access, undo works only on the current record or when you're creating an object. Now, save. Save is different in Access than Excel, Word, PowerPoint. Let's just look at the first difference. Again, it's going to have to do with the difference between raw data and when we're creating objects. Well, now, we haven't created an object yet, but we are entering raw data. Now, I'm not going to click Save. Not up here, not Ctrl S. I'm just going to close this form. And do you think it automatically saves? You betcha. Databases are automatically programmed to do that. So when I double click and open this, just like magic, that raw data, as soon as you type it, it is entered into the table. So you do not have to save raw data. Now, let's look at changing the structure. If I change the structure of the object, that's table, query, forms, or reports. If you change the structure, and we'll see how to change that structure and create objects from scratch later. Now, when I close it, it'll be polite. It'll say, you forgot to save. I'm going to X out of this. You can also Ctrl S at any time. Now, I Ctrl X, S. So when I close this, it's no problem. But again, if you're changing the structure of the object or creating it from scratch, you have to save. And it'll be polite. If you try and close it, just like Excel, Word, etc., it'll remind you that you have to save. So undo and save are quite different than the normal the Office products we've been learning so far, like Excel and Word. All right, so let's go back to our form. Let's open this up. We saw how to add a record and go in and see that it's automatically entered there. But let me close this. Let's go look at this inventory value. Oh, that was not there before. So that means all of these objects are linked to the table. If you change anything in the heart of the database, the table, everything, including queries, forms, reports, automatically updates. Let's just go prove this to ourselves. Right now it's $160 worth because we had 10 times 16. I'm going to close this. Let's go back to our form. And now in a form, we saw how to go to the end and create the new record. You could also use these navigation buttons, arrows, and look through all the records. But what if we just wanted to find? Well, what did we learn earlier? Ctrl F. Ctrl F worked in all the programs for finding. Do you think it works here? As long as you're in the field you want. I want to search for quad, so I'm going to Ctrl F, and I'm going to type quad. Now, current field, yes, you could change. We're going to keep it right there. We don't want to change it to the current document. But whole field. Now, oftentimes, you're searching for a name or a part of a name or a part of an address. So whole field is fine. That means it'll look for only quad. Oops, I even spelled it wrong, but I'll have to fix that. If I say whole field, it will only look for quad. But if I want to look for, oops, I clicked the wrong one. If I want to look for any part, then oftentimes this is the appropriate match to consider. I'm going to say find next. It found a quad. Oh, and then find next. It found the quad long distance. So there's actually two. Now let's try this again with, I get this one, whole field. And now find next. It found the quad. Find next. Forget it. That's the only one it's going to find. So I'm going to say any part and then find next. All right, now find. I want to change. We just sold one, so I'm going to type 9 here. So as soon as we do that, I'm going to close this. I don't have to save. I'm going to go look at inventory value. Sure enough, it is updated. So let's go look in our table. Sure enough, it's updated. So all these objects, remember the form is just a user interface that sits on top of the tables. But if we change something here, the table is updated, and all of the queries and reports are updated also. Now, one last important topic. This is our overview video. There are 4 objects, right? But there's really 8 different views. Now, let's go ahead and look at there's 2 views for each object. So let's first look at the tables. I'm going to double click and open this up. I call this regular view. This is actually called Datasheet View. And sure enough, up here there's a view group in the home ribbon. And this button is the one we're going to use a lot, because that button is a pencil and a triangle and a ruler, which is like you are designing something really cool, right? It means design mode. That's the mode you get into to really create the objects. Now, in the textbook, they show you how to, in regular view here, change the structure of the object. They actually even show you how to create the table from scratch using this view. I don't like to do it that way because we don't have all the options, including some of the important field properties and data validation. So I always like to go to design view. But that means there's 2 views to each object. And I think of it as regular view, like this, and design view. Now, you can click this and see that it's called Datasheet View, and you can come down here and say design view, but I'm just going to use this button every time. Ooh, I know. I remember the first time I looked under a database. I think it was FileMaker Pro in the early 90s, and I was just like, what is that? But this is where you create your table, and we'll do this in our next video. Here's all the field names. Oh, yeah, but they're listed vertically like that. Yeah, well, that's the way it goes. Data type, a type of data validation. And then down here are our field properties. We can add more data validation. What is data validation? Well, we'll talk about it next video, but it's just we don't want junk in our database, so we have to put rules on what type of data goes into each field. All right, in this video, we just want to see, oh, there's design view. Here's back to Datasheet. I'm always going to use this as a toggle. I'm clicking design. I'm going to go out and look. I'm going to click in design, do some things. I'm going to go out and look at the table or whatever the object is. Now I'm going to close this. Let's go to queries. Regular view, design view. Oh, field list. And this is where we create our query. Notice it only has 2 fields, so we only see 2 fields. And later we'll see how to create formulas like that. Again, regular view. As soon as you see that pencil, triangle, and ruler, you click that. That's like looking underneath the hood at how you created this object. Go back to look at it. And especially with queries, you know, when you do complex criteria, you create your query and then you go out and look. Back and forth, back and forth. The book likes to hit run a lot. I just like to click boop, boop, design view. I go look at design view, back to regular view. Let's go to forms. We don't really need to do much with forms. We're just going to click the button that creates our form for us automatically. But there is an important view. When we create our form by clicking a button, which we'll do later, there's this layout view. And you don't want to get stuck in layout view. People, when they're learning Access for the first time, they'll get stuck here and they'll enter their raw data. A deadly move, because then the form won't work. Form view at the top, that's the one where you create raw data. Enter your raw data. Notice when you double click and open it, it's just going to open it. Oh, it did. It opened it in the wrong view up there. But oh, no, it's in the right view. Did I get tricked there? Sometimes I get tricked. Let me try that again. Supplier. Double click and open it up. Oh, no, that's the right view. I got tricked. Anyway, that's make sure it's in form view. Nothing like getting tricked. All right, now let's close this. Finally, reports. Double click it. This is report view. There's also print preview, which will show you how it is, what it looks like before it's print, which is going to be important for us. And we have to close this view, get back over here. But again, there's also this in-between view, layout view, which actually, it's pretty good. Sometimes this, I forget which version this in-between view, I think it was 2007 came in. But sometimes it's easier to fix your report in this view than the design view. Anyway, let's go back to report view. So I always think of it as 2 views, even though for forms and reports there'll be an intermediate view. There's regular view and design view. That's about it for our intro. Oh, yes, one other last thing. Notice I could go up to File and Open. But if I open a database using File, Open, it'll supplant this one and bring the new database in. So if you really want to open 2 databases at once, you have to use Windows Explorer. Oh, so cool. We studied Windows Explorer as our first program. So I have the products. I have this one open. Now I'm going to double click and open this. And so now down on our taskbar, you can see there are 2 videos. I'm sorry, 2 Access files that are open, 1 and 2. All right, now I'm going to close this. So if you want to open up 2 Access files, not videos, then just use Windows Explorer. All right, next video, we'll start creating our database from scratch. See you next video.